Hello, welcome to Learn by Loci, a podcast where we explore the science and technology that shape our world, our thinking, and our safety. I'm Joni McCurvey, Head of Communications at Loci, and with me as always is Samantha Matthews, Loci's founder and CEO. Hello, Samantha.
Hi, how are you today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Me too. I'm jazzed because today's episode is all about memory and the conceptual foundation of how Loci works. And you mentioned it briefly in our first episode, but can you tell me more about why we're called Loci?
Yes. So Loci comes from Latin. If we pronounced it the way maybe scholars might want us to pronounce it, it would be loci, but we all agreed that sounded a little bit pretentious. But it is the method of loci. It's an ancient memorization technique, and it actually has a really cool backstory. So about 2,500 years ago, there's this poet and orator, Simonides, and he's the speaker about town, and he's attending a banquet and goes outside to receive a message during the banquet. And as he's outside, the roof collapses. Sadly, everyone's crushed. Yeah, brutal. Woof, dark turn. But yeah, so he was asked to help loved ones find the remains of their family members that were lost. And to do this, he closed his eyes and he pictured the room and he pictured all the tables, and he was able to remember perfectly where everyone was sitting. And he realized that he had really good memory tied to place and there was something there. And so he started to create this technique of linking visual memory to the physical space that he's in. And he developed this as a mnemonic tool. So a mnemonic is just it's a means to help something to help you remember something. And the method of loci is a technique to do that. And it's a way to remember a lot of information at once in a small little place. It's a filing system for your brain. And you may have seen it on what's the show with the memory palace?
Sherlock.
Yeah, exactly.
Sherlock.
So Sherlock uses the memory palace, and actually memory champions, like 99, I think, or 98% of all the memory champions that, the people that can memorize hundreds of digits of pi and all these things like that, they use this technique. So this is still the most used technique. Like before we had the printing press, before we had all of these things, this is how it worked. And you can do it yourself. Like it's just like you have a shelf, say, like I have behind me, and you focus on putting, like, say you want to remember your credit card number or something like that. You put each number and really picture that number doing something weird, like maybe the 4 is dancing on top of the Life of Pi book or something like that. And so you create this visual little mnemonic device with each object. And then when you want to remember it, especially in sequence, you close your eyes, you go back and you picture and you go back through that in sequence. And so buildings and lots of the way we actually created structures for many years had to do with this technique, because this is how people were remembering huge addresses to their constituents. This is how people were remembering sonnets for their beloved,
the sonnets. Yes.
They're very, you want to get the iambic pentameter just right. So and
I like that, like you're like talking about like a familiar physical location. So like in a manor, you'd have a long hallway with like statues and pieces of art and things on the wall. And you could use that, if you knew it intimately, you could store memories in each of the pieces of art in your hallway or something.
Yeah, exactly. And you can do it with your body too. Like you can remember your grocery list by just bouncing each item of food on like your toes and your knees, and you're like bouncing it with your butt or something. It's a way, because if you physically tie something that you need to remember to something physical, it'll just be that much more extremely memorable.
That's so interesting, because I feel like you mentioned the memory champions, and it's like people today are using this to remember thousands of random digits or hundreds of pictures of people's faces in order and stuff like that. And like, we all feel like our memories are getting worse all the time, but this sort of proves that that's not really true, is it?
Yeah, exactly. There's a great book about it, Moonwalking with Einstein. We give it to everyone that works with us. And it's about this author who's a journalist who ends up training to become a memory champion, because he keeps hearing that anyone can do it. And he's
right. And he's skeptical at first.
Yeah, he's super skeptical at first. And then he ends up training to become a memory champion and like winning a world title Spoiler alert.
I think you're supposed to say spoiler alert before you spoil the ending.
Yeah, that might be how it's supposed to work. Sorry about that, guys. But it's worth reading. But it's worth reading. Trust me.
It's still
you know how it ends. Even though you now know how it ends. The point is that, I just saved you reading it if you don't want to. But the point is, anyone has an amazing memory. It's a skill that we can build. It's like a muscle, right? So
So that's cool. So because you're bringing me to something that I wanted to cover, right? This like the nature of like our capacity for memory and how much it is a part of our body and our being. So I wanted to take a minute to kind of run through our relationship to memory, looking at it in a more historical lens.
Great.
Because like you mentioned the printing press and stuff like that. But so we have our very first evidence of people making marks to record information in clay was the cuneiform was the first kind of writing, and that it was invented in Mesopotamia 5,500 years ago. And before that, for estimates can go as long as 300,000 years. Our only method for recording information was memorization, and so we memorized everything and passed it on generation by generation through oral tradition. And so it stands to reason that our brains evolved to optimize for memory since it was so essential to our survival. You're like, hey, that berry killed your uncle, tell your kids, right? Tell them to tell their kids, right? And that's how we know stuff.
Yeah.
And then between 3,500 and 500 BCE, humans all over the world, from the Middle East and China to Mesoamerica, started developing written languages. But even still, the majority of people remained unable to read or write for thousands of years. So, this is thousands and thousands of years, even with writing as an invention, where people are relying heavily on memory and oral tradition to get by. And then, we have Simonides doing his thing with the method of Loci around 2500 BCE. And so at this point in history, we've got a few people who can read or write, and everyone else using mind palaces to like remember when to plant their crops or whatever. And that goes on for 4,000 years until the Gutenberg press is invented in 1440 CE. And I mean, to be fair, there is evidence of printing presses being used as early as 1050 in China, but our culture widely recognizes the invention of the movable type press in Germany as the moment we supercharged our ability to produce printed reading material, which is essentially the ability to put more and more information somewhere else besides our memories, right?
Yeah.
And so, but then, this is maybe not so surprising, but despite this amazing technological advancement that we make, literacy doesn't become commonplace in Europe and the Americas for like another 500 years until the early 1900s. Yeah. So I think like from like the connection here between memory and literacy is pretty significant, because if you can find information that you need somewhere else, you focus less on remembering it yourself, right? So like if I can go to a book and get the information that I need, I'm not going to try super hard to like walk the hallways of my mind palace to like memorize the sonnet or whatever. I'll just read it to you.
Exactly.
And then, but so people start to read kind of in a like en masse. Yeah. And that is the beginning of this era of widespread externalization of memory that starts in the early 20th century. And then we have things like IBM inventing the computer hard drive in the 50s and the launch of the Google search engine in 1997. And so like for the last 70 years, we've been offloading more and more of the work of remembering to computers and mobile devices. But what all this has me wondering is like, what is a single generation of this offloading against 300,000 years of evolution and memory training?
Totally. Oh, this is like the most juicy little timeline ever. Thank you so much for that, because it really sets the stage for where we are at Loci, which is why we created Loci. Is we're at a crossroads, right? Maybe there's things we don't want to offload, like how to evacuate a building safely, or just like how to get around the place you live, the place you work, the arena you're going to. you really hit on exactly how rooted in our physiology this is. Our brains are wired to remember. And, with modern neuroscience, we're also discovering just how hard-coded we are to connect what we know with our physical location. Like the neurological reasons why the method of loci works is now being proven, which is so cool.
It is so cool. And we're going to get into that in way more detail on our next episode. When we dive into the neurological underpinnings of loci and the GPS of the brain. So
yes, that's my favorite. I'm so excited to talk about that. I mean, I love talking about all of it, but the GPS of the brain is super cool. So I can't wait to dive into that.
For sure. Me too.
I'm ready.
And so if dear listener, if you're ready to never get lost again, find us on Spotify, Apple, Google, or YouTube, and tune in next time to learn how. And this has been Learn by Loci, our monthly podcast about making the world a better, safer place using the most powerful computer of all time. Your brain.
Thanks, Joni.
Thank you, Sam. See you next time.
Bye.
See ya.